December 31st, 1967. Las Vegas, Nevada. A 30-second stunt is about to fail in front of the fountains of Caesar's palace, and the failure is going to work better than success ever could have. The man on the motorcycle wears white leather with red and blue trim, like a flag that learned to ride. He has talked his way into this, conned his way in, if we're being precise, and we will be. He hits the ramp at somewhere around 90 miles an hour, launches over the fountains, 141 feet of Nevada air, and for one photograph's worth of time, he is perfect. Then the landing. The rear wheel catches the safety ramp wrong. The handlebars are ripped from his hands. And what happens next is the most valuable piece of film of his life. The motorcycle goes one way, and the man goes the other, skipping across the pavement like a stone across a pond, over the ramp, across a parking lot, limp as laundry, while the crowd's cheer turns into a single sucked-in breath. Crushed pelvis, broken femur, fractures in the hip, the wrist, the ankles. The legend. And remember that word? Legend, because it's doing heavy lifting in this whole story, says he lay in a coma for 29 days. And here is the part that explains everything you're about to hear. That crash, not a triumph, not a landing, a crash, is what made him a superstar. The film ran on national television. The country could not look away. And somewhere in a hospital bed in Nevada, held together by steel pins, a former insurance salesman from a copper mining town in Montana understood something about America that nobody in show business had ever quite said out loud. They don't buy the ticket to see you make it. They buy the ticket because you might not. And if you can get up afterward, if you can always get up, they will never, ever stop watching. His name was Robert Craig Knievel, Butte, Montana. And for 1 decade, this man in the star-spangled leathers was, by some measures, among the most famous human beings on the planet. Not an athlete exactly, not an actor, not a musician. Something older than all of those. This is the story of Evel Knievel, the last great American daredevil, the greatest self-promoter of his century, and the man who made America watch. Every myth needs a hometown, and Knievel's could not have been better cast if Hollywood had built it. Butte, Montana. A copper mining town on a hill so honeycombed with shafts that the ground itself was negotiable. A place that had been, decades earlier, one of the richest and roughest cities in the American West. By the time Robert Craig Knievel was born there in 1938, the boom was fading, but the culture remained. Hard men, hard work underground, hard drinking above it, and a local philosophy that respected exactly 2 things: toughness and nerve. His parents split early. He was raised largely by his grandparents, a boy with too much energy in a town with too little future, and the standard Butte career path, down the mine, waiting at the end of school like an open grave. He tried everything else. And I mean everything. Semi-pro hockey, he was good enough to organize and promote his own team, which tells you the promoter arrived before the daredevil. Rodeo, ski jumping, competitive regional championship level, a sport that is essentially organized falling, which in hindsight reads like an apprenticeship. A stint in sales, where he discovered the other half of his talent. Bob Knievel could sell. Insurance policies, security services, whatever was in front of him, he could talk a man into things, wear him down, charm him sideways, close him. And in the gaps between the legitimate chapters, there are the other stories, the ones Knievel himself told for the rest of his life, with relish. Stories of hustles and heists, of a young outlaw phase, of police blotters in multiple states. How much of it was true? Biographers have spent decades trying to sort Knievel's actual record from Knievel's preferred record, and the honest answer is, good luck. The man treated his own biography as a first draft, endlessly punched up for the crowd. Even his name comes to us wrapped in a story that's too good to check. The tale he told of a night in a jail cell, sharing the drunk tank with a man the cops called Awful Knofel, which supposedly inspired a jailer to dub him Evel Knievel. He liked it. He softened the spelling to Evel, evil but marketable, and Robert Craig Knievel began the long process of being replaced by his own invention. Hold on to that, because the first thing Evel Knievel ever built wasn't a jump. It was Evel Knievel. By the mid-1960s, the invention was managing a motorcycle dealership in Moses Lake, Washington, a young husband and father, still nobody, selling small bikes in a small town and hunting, always hunting, for the angle. And in 1965, standing in front of the problem of how to get people onto his lot, he found it. He announced a stunt show. He built a ramp. And in front of a crowd of locals, Bob Knievel attempted to jump a motorcycle over a 20-foot box of rattlesnakes and a pair of chained mountain lions. He didn't quite clear it. The rear wheel clipped the snake box. The crowd got a bonus thrill involving loose rattlesnakes, and Knievel landed on the other side of the most important discovery of his life. People will gather to watch a man risk everything for no good reason at all. And they will pay. Within a year, he had a touring troupe, Evel Knievel and his motorcycle daredevils, playing fairgrounds and small tracks across the West. Wheelies, ramp jumps, crashes included free of charge. The troupe didn't last. Troops split the money and split the spotlight. And Knievel had no intention of splitting either. By 1967, he was a solo act, jumping rows of cars for modest purses, breaking bones on a payment plan, inching the distances up, and staring at the same ceiling every regional daredevil before him had died under, in obscurity, one county fair at a time. He needed a stage the whole country could see. And in Las Vegas, there was a brand new casino with fountains out front that everyone in America had heard of. There was just one problem. Nobody at Caesar's Palace had ever heard of Evel Knievel. What happened next is one of the great sales stories in American history, and it is substantially verified, including by the man it was pulled on. Knievel began telephoning Caesar's Palace, not as himself, or not only as himself. The calls came from a lawyer representing Mr. Knievel, from executives interested in the television rights, from reporters from major outlets, all suddenly asking the casino the same question. What can you tell us about this Evel Knievel jumping your fountains? Different voices, different names. One man in a phone booth playing an entire industry the way a kid plays army with two toy soldiers. By the time Knievel finally walked in as Knievel, the casino's boss, Jay Sarno, wasn't being pitched on an unknown. He was catching up to a phenomenon that did not exist, a phenomenon that consisted entirely of one broke daredevil and a stack of phone calls. The jump was booked for New Year's weekend. Understand what Knievel had just done, because it's the template for everything after. He didn't have fame, so he manufactured the evidence of fame and let the world's assumption do the rest. Every self-promoter since, every athlete brand, every hype merchant, every attention entrepreneur of the modern age is running some version of the Caesars playbook, whether they know the name or not. Knievel wrote it in a phone booth in 1967, out of nothing but nerve. And then, this is the part that separates him from every con man before or since, he actually got on the motorcycle. You know what happened. You saw it in the cold open. The perfect flight, the botched landing, the body skipping across the pavement. The footage, shot in one of history's fine ironies, by a crew that included the actress Linda Evans, was so violent, so unforgettable, that it did what no successful jump could have done. Television bought it. America watched it. And watched it again. The crash ran and reran. The legend of the 29-day coma attached itself to the story and rode along. Biographers would later question whether the coma happened at all. And Knievel, characteristically, never let accuracy interfere with a good hospital story. But mark the machinery of what just occurred, because it's the thesis of this entire video. Evel Knievel became famous for failing honestly, spectacularly, with his actual body, in a country that was drowning in performances. The jump was hype. The phone calls were fraud. The coma was, at minimum, negotiable. And underneath all of it was the one thing that could not be faked, filmed from 3 angles. A human being, hitting the ground at highway speed, and living. That combination, the con man's mouth and the crash test body, the LIE wrapped around the absolutely real, is what America fell in love with. He left the hospital on crutches, more famous than he had ever been, and went straight back to work. There were canyons to talk about. The 1970s belonged to him. And to understand why this decade, why this man, you have to remember what America felt like at the time. Because Evel Knievel was not a random star. He was a prescription. The country was heartsick. Vietnam was grinding toward its bitter end on the evening news. Watergate was dismantling the presidency in slow motion. Cities were burning, gas lines were forming, and the anti-hero had conquered the movies. Every protagonist was compromised. Every institution was guilty. Irony was the national language. And into that exhausted landscape walked a man dressed head to toe in the American flag, who looked into the cameras without a gram of irony and sold courage. Plain, dumb, magnificent courage. He said things like a man reading scripture off a gas station sign, about keeping your word, about paying your debts, about getting up when you're hurt, and then he backed it with his skeleton. Kids who were told every day that heroes were dead got one who showed up on Saturday afternoon in cape and colors and put it all on the line in real time. No stuntman, no second take. The delivery system was ABC's Wide World of Sports, the program that brought the planet's spectacles into American living rooms, and Knievel became its recurring miracle. Appearance after appearance across the decade. Rows of cars, rows of trucks, the distances creeping up, the injuries accumulating like interest. The show's famous opening line promised the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And Knievel was the only man in television history reliably contracted to deliver both in the same afternoon with the same body. The ratings were enormous. Some of his broadcasts rank among the most watched things the program ever aired. And the injuries became their own legend, a running national tally. The famous figure, the one that made the record books, was 433 broken bones over a career. Is it true? His biographers, counting from the medical record, arrive at numbers far lower, dozens, not hundreds, which is still a catastrophic ledger for one skeleton, and entirely beside the point. Knievel understood that in his business, the statistics were part of the show. Nobody fact-checks a myth while it's in the air. Then came the toys, and the toys are where the fame turned into an empire. The Evel Knievel stunt cycle, a wind-up gyro launcher, a bendable figure in white leathers, and a little motorcycle that would scream across a kitchen floor hit a homemade ramp, and crash, gloriously, repeatedly, exactly like the real thing. It was one of the great toys of the decade. Over the 70s, Knievel merchandise moved well over $100 million at retail, a fortune in that era's money. And something bigger than money happened along the way. An entire American generation spent its childhood reenacting him. Every plywood ramp propped on a cinder block at the end of every suburban driveway in the 1970s. Every kid launching a bicycle into the air over 3 trash cans and a dare. That was the Knievel liturgy, performed by millions. Ask any man over 55 to show you a scar, and there's a fair chance Evel Knievel is somewhere in the story. He lived the part with total commitment. The Lear jets, the yachts, the diamond-topped canes, the wardrobe of jeweled jumpsuits, spending money in public with the same recklessness he spent cartilage. It wasn't hypocrisy, it was consistency. The whole act, on the bike and off, said the same sentence. Tomorrow is not guaranteed, so watch what I do with today. And the economics of the act deserve a moment, because they explain the escalation better than psychology does. A daredevil's product is anticipation, and anticipation depreciates fast. 10 cars amazed a crowd in 1968. By 1971, 10 cars was a warm-up act, and the crowd's eyes asked the only question the business ever asks: what's next? So the rows grew. Cars became trucks, trucks became buses, and every increment bought a bigger purse against worse odds. Knievel priced himself accordingly. His fees for a single afternoon's work climbed into figures that made athletes and movie stars blink. But read the fine print of that contract the way he had to. The money was for the distance, and the distance was measured in margin for error, and the margin was made of his pelvis. He was, quite literally, selling his skeleton on layaway. There's a reason he told interviewers, in 100 variations across the decade, that he'd made vast fortunes and spent them just as fast. A man who banks his money is planning for a future, and planning for a future was terrible showmanship. The spending was the stunt, continued by other means. He also never let the country forget where the act came from. The private jet was named for Montana. The stories always circled back to Butte. And when he rolled into towns, he played the visiting king from the mining hill, a man who'd escaped the shaft not by being better than the men down there, but by being willing to do in public what they did in the dark every day. Gamble the body for the paycheck. That's a piece of his connection with working America that the coastal press never quite decoded. Miners, linemen, roughnecks, farmers, men whose jobs kept actuarial tables in business, looked at Knievel and saw not a lunatic, but a colleague with better lighting. He risked his bones for money in front of everyone. They did it every shift, invisibly. He was their pain, promoted to prime time. But rows of cars and buses have a mathematical problem. There is always one more, until there isn't. The act needed a finale the whole world would stop for. And Knievel had been talking about it for years, first as a line to reporters, then as a promise, and finally as a trap he had built for himself out of his own publicity. He was going to jump a canyon. He wanted the Grand Canyon. The federal government, displaying uncharacteristic wisdom, said no. So Knievel found a canyon that couldn't refuse him. He leased private land on the rim of the Snake River Canyon outside Twin Falls, Idaho, a quarter-mile of open air over a river gorge, deep enough to kill anything that fell into it. No motorcycle on Earth could do it, and he knew it. What his team built instead, under a former Navy rocket engineer named Robert Truax, was the SkyCycle X2, less a motorcycle than a steam-powered missile with a seat, designed to fire him across the gorge on a rail and bring him down by parachute. Calling it a cycle at all was pure Knievel, the last, thinnest thread connecting the stunt to the sport that made him. The promotion was gargantuan. This was 1974, the age of the mega fight, and Knievel's canyon jump was sold exactly like one. Boxing promoters, a live gate at the canyon rim, closed-circuit broadcasts in theaters across the country, a global press tour with Knievel starring as his own hype man, part athlete, part evangelist, part carnival barker, spinning mortality into ticket sales. Would he make it? The engineers had launch data that said, maybe. Knievel had a line for the cameras that said it didn't matter. He'd given his word he would jump, and his word, unlike his bones, had never been broken. September 8th, 1974. Thousands at the rim, a rowdy, legendary crowd that had spent days turning the Idaho sagebrush into a lawless carnival of its own. Millions more in theaters, families gathered around televisions waiting for the delayed footage, an entire country synchronizing its attention on one steel ramp aimed at the sky. Knievel, in the white flight suit, made his farewells with the gravity of a man who had priced in every outcome. He'd spoken all week in the plain, fatalistic sentences that were his true poetry. He'd given his word, he was going, and whatever waited on the other side of the countdown was between him and God. Whatever else was theater that day, the goodbye to his family was not. The countdown, the steam shriek, the sky cycle leaves the rail, and the parachute deploys. Instantly. At launch, while the rocket is still climbing. The X-2 arcs up, slows, tips, and begins drifting down into the canyon it was supposed to cross. A man in a star-spangled flight suit dangling beneath the anticlimax of the century, floating toward the river while the whole world watches through its fingers. For a long, awful minute, the wind held the verdict. A landing in the Snake River, strapped into that machine. And this video has a different ending. He came down near the water's edge, on the same side he'd started from by the river's grace and the winds, and was pulled out, bruised, bloodied around the face, and alive. The theaters booed. The press sharpened its knives. Words like fraud and farce got their workout, and the take, enormous, became part of the accusation. He'd sold the world a canyon crossing and delivered a parachute ride. But watch what the failure did, because this is Caesar's palace all over again, at planetary scale. The canyon flop didn't shrink Evel Knievel. It completed him. The most famous thing he ever did is a thing he failed to do, and America, after a week of jeering, quietly filed the memory under legend anyway. Because he got in the rocket. Whatever the lawyers and the engineers and the fine print said, one fact sat there, unbudgeable. They lit the candle, and he was strapped to it. You can fake a lot of things in this world. You cannot fake sitting on a rocket. 8 months later, he proved the point in the opposite direction. May 1975, Wembley Stadium, London. 90,000 people, 13 buses. He came up short, crashed horrifically, shattered his pelvis, and then, waving off the stretcher, stood up in front of 90,000 witnesses, took the microphone, and retired on the spot. Told the crowd they were the last people who would ever see him jump, that he would never, ever jump again, and walked, broken, out of the stadium on his own feet, because Evel Knievel did not leave arenas horizontally. 5 months later, he jumped 14 buses at Kings Island, Ohio. Cleared them clean, the longest successful jump of his career, in front of one of the largest television audiences his sport would ever draw. That's the whole man in one paragraph. isn't it? The retirement was real when he said it. The comeback was inevitable when it came. And the crowd forgave the contradiction instantly, because the getting up, the always getting up, was the only promise he'd actually ever made. Every act has a closing number, and Knievel's came fast, and it came ugly, and unlike his crashes, this one he could not stand up from. The stunts had already begun their decline into strangeness. In early 1977 came the Chicago Shark Tank jump, an indoor leap over a pool of live sharks for a television special, an idea so perfectly of its moment that popular culture would later coin a permanent phrase for exactly this kind of desperate spectacle. In rehearsal, he lost the bike. The crash injured Knievel and, far worse, seriously hurt a cameraman. The first time his act had truly maimed someone other than himself. Something in the machinery had turned. The falls weren't mythic anymore. They were just falls. But it wasn't a motorcycle that ended Evel Knievel. It was a book and a baseball bat. In 1977, a promoter named Shelley Saltman, who had worked on the Snake River tour, published an insider account of that circus, portraying a Knievel the public wasn't supposed to see, profane, cruel to the people around him, at war with his own image. Knievel's response was not a lawsuit, and not a press conference. He found Saltman outside a studio lot in California, and while an associate held the man down, Evel Knievel beat him with an aluminum baseball bat, shattering his arm as Saltman raised it to protect his skull. There's no both sides to give you here, and this channel wouldn't invent one. It was a premeditated, brutal assault in broad daylight by a man who then said, in substance, that he'd do it again. Knievel pleaded guilty. He served months in county jail, and jail, for Knievel, was almost the smallest part of the sentence. Because the sponsors who had built the empire understood something instantly. The man in the flag suit, the one who told America's children to keep their word and take their lumps, had just answered criticism with a bat. The toy company walked. The endorsements evaporated. The promoters stopped calling. Within a couple of years, the machine that had generated one of the great fortunes in entertainment was gone. And so, courtesy of the taxman, the lawyers, and Knievel's own imperial spending, was the fortune. The judgment Saltman won against him in civil court, a cold sal one, went famously uncollected. There was nothing left to collect. The 80s and 90s were the long, strange afterlife of a legend. The yacht's gone, the jet's gone. Evel Knievel selling paintings and autographs, appearing at openings and card shows, a monument to a decade the country had moved on from, while his son Robbie carried the family trade on, clearing jumps his father never could, on bikes his father would have envied, to a fraction of the attention. Because it was never really about the distances. It never had been. And the body kept presenting its invoices. The decades of impacts. Diabetes. A liver wrecked by hepatitis C, contracted, he said, through the blood transfusions that his career had made routine. The crashes billing him one last time, 20 years late. A transplant bought him time. Lung disease spent it. He knew the end was coming, and he did one final, very Knievel thing about it. He staged it. In the spring of 2007, in front of a television congregation of millions, Evel Knievel was baptized at a famous California megachurch, testifying that he'd finally been broken open by grace, and hundreds in the crowd came forward to be baptized with him, one last audience following him off one last ramp. Whether it was a deathbed conversion, a final performance, or, both things being true having been the man's entire biography, some inseparable alloy of the two, is exactly the question he'd have wanted us arguing about. He died that November, in Florida. He was 69. He had outlived his era, his fortune, his health, and most of his enemies. And one last time, everyone was watching. So who was he? Because two completely irreconcilable men answer to the name, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Here's the first man. Evel Knievel was a con artist, maybe the purest America ever produced. He faked the phone calls that launched him. He inflated his injuries, embroidered his past, invented his own outlaw resume, and treated the truth the way he treated landing ramps. Useful, but optional. He was, by the accounts of many who worked for him, vain, volatile, and vicious. He beat a writer with a bat for describing him accurately. He burned money, marriages, and people. And his single most famous feat is a stunt he did not complete, sold at premium prices. Strip the myth to the ledger, and the ledger reads, promoter, first and always. The daredevil act was the product. The con was the craft. And here's the second man, and every word of this is just as true. Nobody held the throttle for him. Every single time, the fairground rows of junkers, Caesars, the buses, the rocket. It was his hands on the bars, his body writing the checks his mouth had signed. He performed with shattered bones taped and pinned, jumped hurt more often than healthy, and never once, not once in a whole career built on the likelihood of catastrophe, sent a stuntman out in the suit. The falls that made him famous were not effects. The getting up was not scripted. In an industry of illusions, at the bottom of all his lies sat the most non-negotiable fact in show business. The man actually did it. That's the alloy. That's why he doesn't resolve. The mouth was a carnival. The body was a church. He lied about everything except the takeoff. And it turns out the takeoff was the only part America ever really needed to be true. And look at what the alloy built, because his fingerprints are on more of the modern world than we usually admit. Every extreme sports league, every freestyle rider spinning a motorcycle under stadium lights, every action sports empire and energy drink stunt team and record jump live stream. The entire industry of televised nerve traces its lineage directly and unapologetically to the man in the flag suit. The athletes who came after him jump farther, flip higher, and land softer than he ever did. Not one of them has ever mattered as much, because they inherited a stage Knievel had to build out of phone calls, plywood, broken bones, and the discovery that made him. America will always gather to watch someone bet everything. He wasn't the best rider of his time. He was barely, by technical standards, a good one. He was something rarer. He was the one who understood what the crowd was actually for. They still gather for him, you know. Every summer, his hometown, Butte, Montana, the copper town that was supposed to swallow him, has thrown a festival in his name. Daredevils and motorcycles filling the streets of the city he spent his whole life escaping and never really left. The kid who invented himself in a phone booth became the town's patron saint. He would have found that hilarious, and then he would have charged appearance fees. So, Evel Knievel, a boy from a mining town who decided the mine wasn't getting him. A phone booth, a fake lawyer, and the fountains of Caesar's palace. A body skipping across Nevada pavement and a country that couldn't look away. A flag-colored suit in America's darkest decade, selling the one thing nobody else had in stock. A rocket, a parachute, and the most famous failure of the century. A baseball bat that destroyed in 4 minutes what 400 crashes couldn't touch. And at the bottom of every lie he ever told, a man who always got on the bike. Evel Knievel made America watch. Not because he always made it, he usually didn't. Because he always showed up, always took off, and always, somehow, got up. So, you tell me, who was the real Evel Knievel? The greatest con man who ever sold America a ticket, or the last honest performer in show business? Because whatever he promised, he was the one who paid for it. And I know you were there. This audience, more than any other, was there. If you watched Snake River in a theater or on a neighbor's television, if you had the stunt cycle screaming across your kitchen floor, if there's a scar on your body right now from a plywood ramp and a bicycle in 1974, tell me the story in the comments. Evel's real monument was never in Butte. It's in a million driveways, and I want to hear about yours.